What was the inspiration for Possessor? Was it an image? Was it an idea? How did you first get the idea of this movie?
So I started writing Possessor during a bit of a weird period where a lot was in flux, and I was finding, in a sense, that I was having difficulty seeing myself in my own life. I was feeling sort of outside my own life, and waking up in the mornings and kind of feeling like I was sitting up into someone else's life and having to construct some kind of character who could operate in that context. So I wanted to write a film about a character who may or may not be an imposter in their own life. And so the seed of the film is really in those more dramatic scenes, the relationship scenes, and then the thriller sci-fi stuff was kind of built out from there.
How long did it take to write? Because it's an incredibly complex, very layered film in terms of ideas and scenes, and there's a lot of symmetry in there. How long did it take you to write?
Honestly, it was being revised for quite a few years because I'd think that it was finished, and then for various reasons, I mean, it's independent film, sometimes it just takes a very long time to get something made and financed and cast and everything. So I would think I had it, but then as time went on, I would decide to rewrite it and realize it needed something else. And so it changed quite a lot over those 8 years, but it wasn't a constant flow of writing. It was really bits and pieces as I tweaked it.
So when did the sci-fi element come in?
I mean, pretty early on, to be honest. I started researching because the character had to sort of believe initially, when it was a bit more of a straight drama, that he may or may not be somebody else. I started researching actual brain implants and the history of sort of physical mind control, which became really interesting. And so that started to creep in. And then I don't know, it just started to feel more fun to kind of turn it into an actual sci-fi thing and run with that for a while. Although I still think there's probably a solid drama there. Maybe I'll go back to it.
What did you find out about mind control?
So I started reading about some neuroscience experiments that were done. Especially, there's an interesting doctor named Jose Delgado, who was a Spanish doctor, but working in the United States, especially in the 50s and 60s, doing these brain implant experiments. So he had this device called a stimoceiver, which was essentially a wire with a receiver. The wire would go into the brain of an animal, and eventually he also was implanting into human patients and stimulating electrically certain parts of their brains and finding that he could control some very interesting things. I mean, motor skills, hands, he could open and close an iris, but also weirdly emotions and some other behavioral stuff. So he wrote a very interesting book about it called Physical Control of the Mind Towards a Psycho-Civilized Society. And it's this sort of amazing document of these experiments he was doing. It's kind of hugely dystopian, but he's also very smart, and it's also kind of a plea for more money. Like it's like an argument for funding in a way, but it's really interesting stuff. And actually, in the film, there's that scene with the bull on the TV, this sort of experiment, and that's actual footage from an experiment he did where he implanted this stimoceiver into a bull's brain, and then got into the ring, and the bull charged him, and then he hit this radio transmitter, and it veered off.
Oh. Did you always envisage it would be a woman who was the hit person? I mean, you could have told the story either way, through Colin's eyes or Tasya's eyes. Why did you settle on a woman?
To be honest, the very first outline for it, the character was male. I was I guess defaulting to male because it was loosely based on my own experiences. But then I thought, I just wanted to write a woman because I'd done a male character in Antiviral, and also there's this sort of thing where I feel like we've all seen the kind of traumatized male character who's seen too much on the job and can't kind of associate with his family. I mean, we've all seen the Hurt Locker and films like that before, so it just felt less, I guess, cliched to have a woman who was having trouble separating her domestic life from the kinds of violent experiences she was having.
It's also more disturbing, I found, in terms of a woman perhaps awakening violent thoughts or impulses that she hadn't ever realised were there. And was that something that came out?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, not universally, but at the end of the film, I find it's a small kind of group that I've gotten these responses from, but fathers seem to be way more disturbed by the ending, whereas mothers kind of can relate to Vos and as a character. So I don't know if part of that is a gendered thing, just the idea of a mother having those kind of violent impulses and not being able to settle into her domestic life is maybe more disturbing for fathers, I think, than mothers who seem to be able to actually relate to it.
How did you approach the casting? Why Andrea and why Chris?
So, I mean, my approach to casting is a little bit stupid and visceral. I just see an actor who has some kind of thing that there's certain actors, you see them on screen and it's just, there's something amazing about them. They're immediately interesting. They're hitting all these interesting notes in their performances. They're never boring, and they're never, they're never lazy about it. There's just something immediately fascinating. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm early in my career and maybe this will change, but I feel like if you just take an actor like that and you plug them into a role, something fascinating is going to happen because they're that kind of performer. I also, especially with Possessor, the development process was very long, so I wanted actors who would kind of surprise me and who would collaborate with me. I didn't want actors who I was just sort of dictating terms to. So, yeah, I mean, I ended up getting really lucky. Both Chris and Andrea are fantastic like that. We're great collaborators and very interesting and to work with and very smart. And
I mean, you've slightly answered the next question, which is how do you direct actors who are effectively playing each other? I mean, did you have the time for them to sort of work with each other? I mean, are they directing? Do they direct each other, or do you direct them directing each other? I mean, how does it? When you get my gist, don't you? Which is how do you direct people who are effectively playing each other's personalities in a different personality?
No, for sure. It's interesting. Initially, I was trying to figure out what that process would be and create a structure for it. And I talked to them very early on, about how we would approach it. Did someone want to take the lead, and did they want to be on set for each other's scenes when they weren't in those scenes to just kind of get a sense of the performance and that kind of thing. In practice, it was actually pretty organic. I mean, I had specific ideas myself about, how the versions of the character would overlap, and some of it was in the script and some of it was ideas that I had that we talked about early on. They also talked a fair bit. They also had their own discussions kind of behind the scenes, asking each other how Vos would behave under certain circumstances. And then just on set, we were kind of collaborating as we went, and we kind of built it out organically, I guess, through that process. It was way less structure than I had originally anticipated.
It's interesting that Andrea is using her own accent. With the discussions about that.
Yeah, I mean, I just yes, there were some discussions. Because she sort of does this American accent when she's in the machine, but then has her own natural accent, which I just liked because I like actors working with their natural accents. I think there's something kind of personal about it. It's interesting. I've had a few comments about that from UK, from people from the UK. I feel like those kinds of interests in like the northern accent, for interest, like I think that stands out more to people.
Yeah. No, the thing that really stood out for me is the nightmare sequences. They really add a psychological depth to the film, which we've seen films like Face Off where with these situations happen, but we don't really see the psychological toll that this must take. How did you develop those fantastic sort of vignettes, those little sort of the melting faces, and they're truly disturbing? I mean, were they in the script, or did you work on those separately to the film?
They were in the script, but they were sort of vague descriptions in the script. One of the advantages of having this very long development period is I had a lot of time to work with Kareem Hussein, my cinematographer, and eventually Dan Martin, the special effects lead who came in. And we just spent years experimenting with ideas, camera tricks, and all of those sequences are completely practical. They're totally in camera, physical special effects and camera effects. And so we just built out this kind of bank of ideas that we had that could be used through experimentation. A lot of it was just stuff we were doing in Kareem's living room with projectors and cameras. And so in the script, those sequences are vaguely described, but it was sort of understood among us that they were a chance to just kind of go off and do all the stuff that we were interested in.
The sound design is very interesting on this movie because I hesitate to use the word score because it's not a traditional score, but how did you approach the music and the sound design, and particularly in the nightmare sequences? What were you looking for sound-wise?
So I mean, they're both, it is both score. There is some very traditional score elements and also sound design elements, and our sound designer Martin Pavian and Jim Williams, or composer, both had done stuff before. They both worked on a number of films. For instance, they did a lot of Ben Wheatley films, and so they had an existing relationship. And I was working with both of them for the first time. I mean, they're just both very, very inventive, creative people. I mean, my goal to a certain degree is just to surround myself with these kind of mad geniuses and feed off them. For instance, when Jennifer Jason Leigh's character Gerder speaks over in the head of Colin, that's actually her voice being run through a bone. Like the audio is actually plugged into a physical animal bone, and that's used to distort her voice. And that was an idea Martin came up with. Actually, we experimented with running it through my head at one point, where I had a mic and you can run sound through the human skull, and it's sort of you can hear it in your head. It's very interesting because the bone vibrates, but it was a little too noisy. And same with Jim. I mean, he's just a brilliant composer. We had done a short film just prior to this, and I don't know. It's an organic process with some very smart people.
It's an incredibly violent film. I wonder what kind of your thoughts on. There could have been no violence. I can't see that could have been very much more violence. But how did you settle on the level of violence you're going to use for this film? And did you think it was important to show these murders in such detail?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, first of all, in general, I feel like if you're dealing with violence, it's better to show it. I'm more disturbed by, say, a PG-13 where 100 people get killed and you just don't have a visceral response to it. I feel like that sanitizing of violence is kind of a more disturbing trend in film than violence that hits you in a visceral way. But also in this case, it was very narrative because, of course, so much of the film is rooted in Vos's relationship with violence and the various ways that she experiences it and then remembers it. And so it really had to be explicit because it was her own psychological experience, and the film is, of course, so subjective.
Was it ever toned down?
Was it ever toned down?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean was there a more violent cut?
Yes. Did you ever find yourself censoring yourself?
No, I didn't, and fortunately, I had a lot of support with my producers and distributors to not censor myself and to be able to release the film as I intended.
The violence does tap in. I mean, the film is incredibly contemporary on so many levels, and one of them is, well, let's start with drone violence. There is a sense that we are entering a new age of warfare where people are killing people without, even meeting them necessarily, being in the same room as them. Rather, I wonder, was that something that you took on board? I mean, the new ways that wars can be fought in the modern world.
No, absolutely, and the interesting thing is that in the case of drone violence, sometimes you will get drone pilots who have PTSD from killing people, strangely. So they respond on an emotional and psychological level as though they're actually in war physically and can't handle the psychological toll of being responsible for actually killing people. So there's that was definitely something I looked at as I was writing it. Vos is sort of, I think, kind of on a professional level, a combination of an actor and a drone pilot with PTSD. I think that would be an accurate real world analogy.
Another theme I noticed was this it kind of tapped into the modern obsession with conspiracy theories. Each hit is a performance. It's not a murder, or assassination, it's a performance, and there's a narrative, which we're seeing a lot. The word narrative is being used a lot in politics now. Can you talk a little about that? I mean, what are you saying there about using those words, performance and narrative, to essentially talk about assassinations?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. That's a very disturbing trend in politics that has sort of emerged since I started writing it. That's sort of like a Trump era issue. That, not that stuff didn't exist before, but the fact that it's coming so much to the forefront and defining politics right now. Those terms, as I use them, were intended to be more personal terms. On one level, the film is very much about the ways that we construct characters and narrative in order to function, not just to perform for other people, but also for ourselves, our own ideas about ourselves, our personal histories, our personal narratives. I think I don't believe that there is a sort of true self beneath the surface that we're then performing on top of. I think that it's all kind of an act, and it's all something that's partly comes from us and is partly generated from our environment and from the experiences that we have. But there's no one kind of true self. It's kind of all performance. It's all narrative. And so for me, that was the intention with that kind of language. But you're absolutely right. There's a new, more sinister, possible relevance to that kind of writing that wasn't intended, but sadly is maybe on the nose.
Well, something else that's hinted at is the loss of privacy in the digital world. What's actually going on at the place where Colin works? Is it the zoo through? What's going on there? With the curtains and the blinds?
Yeah. So I mean, I was writing this early on during the Snowden leaks, and so I was feeling very angry about the end of privacy in the era of technology, and so that was obviously, it's satirical. The real world version of that is probably AI doing the same thing. But the idea that this company could violate someone's privacy so completely for something as mundane as data mining what kinds of curtains and blinds they own that was the idea. It's a data mining company where it's a total invasion of privacy, but for something intensely mundane, and that's just considered normal in this near future world that no one has real privacy.
For me, this was a very different type of filmmaking to Antiviral. Do you think the films share DNA? I mean, do you see them as connected, or was there anything in particular that you learned from Antiviral that went into Possessor?
I mean, to a certain degree, absolutely. It was my first feature, and so I learned a lot. But also, I don't know. It's been a long time between films, and I guess my tastes have changed, and I've just my interests have changed. I was making Antiviral when I was in one very particular place, and I guess my cinematic impulses have shifted over the course of nearly a decade. So I mean, they're related on a certain level. They're both kind of the satirical, alternate present or kind of near future sci-fi horror. But I think formally they're very different, and Possessor sort of just more accurate to where I am right now.
I'm sure you're very bored of hearing questions about your father, but I'm curious to know, when you show these films to him, do you have his inputs while you're making them, or do you prefer to treat him as the audience and he'll see it when it's ready?
I don't know. I don't have a particular rule set for that. when you're working at a certain point, you just show your film to as many people as you can because you want fresh eyes on it. So there's a certain point in the editing process where I show my films to a range of friends and family, and usually that's where he sees it.
No, this is a bit of a strange time to be asking this question because obviously it's a time of great uncertainty. But what are you doing next? I mean, the great thing about Possessor is that it could easily, I mean, without wishing it to sound like a bad thing, there could be a franchise there. There could be another film in the world of Possessor. I mean, what do you see yourself doing next? I mean, could you return to the world of Possessor, or would you be doing something else?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to return to Possessor in some form or another. I mean, the two projects I have that are sort of furthest along right now are a film, Infinity Pool, which is a kind of tourist resort satire with some horror and sci-fi elements that is fairly far along, and also a space horror film called Dragon that I've been developing for a while. But absolutely, I would for sure go back to Possessor. I think there's a world to expand on there that I'd be happy to take on if I got the chance.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Brandon.
Thank you so much.